I'm sorry, Pokemon fans, but Legends Arceus is not a great game. As a Pokemon fan myself, I'm very happy to see Game Freak finally trying something new, but just because Legends Arceus is new and different does not mean that it's good. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to give a thorough review here, so let's get into things. Starting with the new semi-open world, since that's one of the most significant changes. If you know very little about the game, the open world is actually very similar in style to Monster Hunter. There are several distinct zones with base camps you can spawn and respawn at. These areas all have their own environments and all have different Pokemon within them. On a fundamental level, I have no issue with Legends Arceus' open world. The foundations here are fine, and seeing Pokemon wandering out in the wild is actually pretty cool. But, where is everything? Or just anything? What am I supposed to do in this empty box of a world? All there is to explore and find are some new Pokemon randomly wandering around and some resources to gather for crafting. But before you hardcore Legends Arceus simps get upset at me for ignoring that Monster Hunter has a similar world set up with just enemies and resources, I would like to remind you that Monster Hunter's world is far more compact. Additionally, each section of Monster Hunter's world transforms into a pseudo-boss fight arena while you're chasing down big monsters. Monster Hunter's world isn't built to be explored, though. It's built to fight massive monsters in and sometimes grab a few resources when you need them. Legends Arceus opts for a larger world, but fails to add anything else to rationalize that bigger world. The way I see it, Legends Arceus has two ways to solve this issue. Shrink the world down to de-emphasize exploration and keep things compact, leaning into Monster Hunter similarities, or to keep the world large or even make it larger, but add in a lot more mechanics to make exploration actually interesting and engaging. The space-time distortions are a great example of a mechanic that makes the world feel more alive, but they don't happen that often and take a while to start once they do appear. But another important change that impacts the world is that Legends Arceus introduced the ability to catch Pokemon outside of combat. This change is really interesting and makes a lot of sense within a large world. It also allows the Pokedex to become much more engaging than what we've always had. While I enjoy this mechanic, it does de-emphasize Pokemon battles, especially when aggressive Pokemon will gang up on you when you just want to fight and catch a single Pokemon. Because of this, actually entering combat to catch any Pokemon that isn't an alpha feels like a waste of time. This feels even worse since the change to the Pokedex means that catching any single Pokemon has a lot less impact. To be fair though, there is nothing requiring you to complete each entry, only to catch one of each, assuming you want to unlock some extra post-game content. But I still think wild Pokemon should either wait their turn or just not hop into your fight with another Pokemon. I understand that will make it less realistic, but sometimes a realistic mechanic isn't worth having because it takes away more than it adds. Unfortunately, we aren't done though. I have two other minor complaints. Because you can't gather resources from trees or rocks while mounted, you're forced to eventually go on resource gathering runs to top up on Pokeballs, which you cannot convince me are fun. I don't want to have to run around for 30 minutes to an hour looking for apricorn trees and rocks with iron ore. I assume if you aren't trying very hard to fill out a significant portion of the Pokedex as you go, this is less of an issue, but what else is there to do while exploring the world except catch Pokemon? If it were possible to gather resources while riding around, it might never be necessary to have that 30-minute lull in gameplay. The second minor complaint is that sprinting on foot is a massive nuisance. Pushing in the stick on the base Switch controller is a terrible way to sprint. It feels like I'm going to break the controller. And since the stamina meter is invisible, I never know if I stopped sprinting because I wasn't crushing my controller enough or if I just ran out of stamina. It would be a lot easier to bind sprint to the B button and have crouch set to pushing in the stick. It would also line up with traditional Pokemon controls that way. I really don't know why they changed the binding. Maybe Game Freak was playing too many FPSs on controller or something and thought they needed a new sprint. I couldn't tell you. I've said my piece about the world now though, so let's talk about the Pokemon battles. Of which there are definitely not enough. Because it feels incredibly annoying to fight random wild Pokemon, there are already a lot less battles from the get-go. In addition to this though, alpha Pokemon always seem to either be too strong or too weak. There are only a few short levels during which your Pokemon have a well-balanced challenge trying to catch or fight an alpha. Outside of those levels though, you're either curb stomped before you really get a chance to fight back, or you demolish the alpha before it's really had a chance to do anything. And towards the end of the game, you can demolish alphas several levels above you if you just give its back a little tickle. Imagine if this game scaled alphas based on the levels of the Pokemon in your party. Kind of like what happens in Pixelmon. Am I allowed to say a Minecraft mod is better than this game? Actually, pretend like you didn't hear that so I don't piss off even more people. What I was really looking forward to in Legends Arceus were interesting and challenging battles, and so far, since I'm something of a completionist, the game has not been harder or more interesting than any other Pokemon game. I haven't done any post-game content yet, but I was told that this game was supposed to be hard, and it has been anything but. Let me tell you an example of what is not an interesting battle, though. Multiple Pokemon ganging up on you all at once. And it's supposed to be a trainer battle. I don't mind a challenge, but this doesn't feel like a challenge, it just feels unfair. The gang up battles aren't even that hard either, so the issue isn't that it's too challenging, it just makes you annoyed that you can't have multiple Pokemon out at once like they can. Maybe a good Pokemon game idea though? Maybe? Please just don't make Arceus 5 more times? And to cap it all off though, there aren't even that many trainer battles, gang ups or otherwise. They clearly wanted to emphasize their world, but with how plain and empty it is, I seriously think that was a mistake. There is one other source of potential Pokemon battles though, noble Pokemon. Although you never actually need to have a Pokemon battle with them. You can just take them on by yourself, which is pretty cool in theory, but also makes the noble Pokemon battles massively underwhelming. I guess the goal was to give the player as many ways of avoiding combat as possible. It's not like anyone collected their Pokemon to use anyway. Just toss them all in the ranch and beat everyone up yourself. Potentially another interesting Pokemon game idea though? But since the game seems to want to keep us from fighting, let's talk about the other big thing, the other thing that happens outside of combat. The story. But, I gotta say, I'm not even sure if there was a story. I mean, I didn't hear anything. There were a couple of generic noises, but can we really be sure if there was a story? Of course, I'm kidding, but also the lack of voice acting really shows in this game. With the past standard Pokemon formula, voice-acted characters felt like they weren't that necessary. The shift here for Pokemon to feel and look, in heavy air quotes, like a more modern game also emphasizes the lack of voice acting. The few noises they do add to the dialogue only further emphasize the silence when no voice acting follows. I don't really know how Game Freak looked at these dialogues and thought they looked fine as they were, but hopefully they'll finally shell out a handful of dollars and add some trash voice acting or something in the next few games. I'm not going to hold my breath though, and I'd suggest you refrain from doing so as well, or else you might suffocate yourself. Looking at the actual story itself though, we see something. I don't know if I'd even call this a story, but then again, it isn't surprising that Pokemon botched the story again. One would hope that since they finally broke from the generic badge collection story that we might get something more interesting, but here we are. I'll briefly go into some spoilers though, so I'll give you to the count of right now to skip ahead. The only thing of note that happens in the story besides frolicking in the Hisui wastelands is that you get exiled from Jubilife. This moment could have been interesting. It could have been a little nerve-wracking. It could have been anything. Instead, it felt fake because the reasons you were exiled were dumb. Nearly every character in the story thought it was stupid, and the stakes could not have been lower. You got exiled into the region with Pokemon 4 to 5 times weaker than you. There was never any risk, and the immediate issue of being alone in the wild was resolved after a mere handful of minutes. I won't go on any more about the story, but man, they really slapped that together. And of course, they couldn't resist holding the player hostage for far longer than necessary in an attempt to set up the dumpster fire story and explain the very simple mechanics. I know Pokemon has always been a hand-holding type of game, but until the later games, I never really noticed exactly how much. Especially in a game with the emphasis on open world and exploration. Preventing the player from experiencing that world for anything longer than a small handful of minutes is practically a sin. I realize this isn't going to be the most fair comparison, but both Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild toss you into their worlds almost immediately. Again, I do understand these are not exactly comparable games, but I still think that taking a few cards from massively successful open world games is probably a good idea. Moving on though, I'd like to bring your attention to one other aspect of the story. This is an isekai, isn't it? Transported from another world, way more powerful than everyone else because you have a phone, and embarking on a large-scale quest. This game is an isekai. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's just strange and somewhat amusing. Although it does lose a lot of luster when you realize your special power is that you're a normal person. But like I said before, unless you're playing the 1 or 2 Pokemon games that have decent stories, you probably don't have high expectations. That's fine though, I didn't either. So let's talk about how the game looks. But so, about this one. I was looking for some nice Vista shots to show, but all of them just emphasize how empty the world is. Even the trailer fails to provide any good shots of the world. It just looks like a game's beta instead of an officially released product. In that respect, I understand why there isn't any introductory beautiful vista like in Breath of the Wild. And yes, I hear you again getting upset that I'm comparing these two games, but Breath of the Wild is also a Switch game, yes? It was released for the Switch in March of 2017, so it's definitely a Switch game. I don't and didn't expect Legends Arceus to stand toe-to-toe with Breath of the Wild, but I at least hope that we wouldn't have to see Pokemon a few feet away from you start dropping frames like I do these stupid rotten apricorns. Very, very good simile, right? I'm a genius, I know. But I just expected, or really hoped, for something more. Pokemon that wouldn't pop into existence right in front of me as I ride by, these horrendous grass textures, or these stupid white lines that I cannot believe were not and have not been fixed. It is beyond me how the game was released in this state. The best and worst thing I can say about the graphics is that they exist. Before I end things out, though, I want to touch briefly on the sound design of Legends Arceus. I've already complained about the lack of voice acting, so I'll set that aside. The noises they use for various actions, though, just hurt my soul. The flute noise to call the Pokemon you ride is the exact same across all of the Pokemon, and yet they have times where someone plays a different melody on that stupid flute. I don't know why they didn't bother to make a few slightly different jingles. There are also a small handful of generic noises that are repeated over and over again during dialogue that just fall so flat even the first time you hear them. And they definitely aren't any more interesting the 10th time either. But one thing that I can't complain about is the music in this game. Pokemon has always done a great job with its music. Legends Arceus is unsurprisingly no exception. I wouldn't go so far as to say the music is astounding enough to begin making up for the game's many flaws, but it is definitely good. That's all though. I know I've likely pissed off a majority of Pokemon fans, but this video technically isn't over yet, and hopefully I'll get the rest of you too in a second here. If it isn't obvious already, I don't recommend getting Pokemon Legends Arceus. If you're a hardcore fan, you probably won't listen to me, so go ahead and get it. I have a suspicion that this will be the new formula for a while, so you may as well decide if you like the new direction. For any of you who politely accepted my criticism of the game, thank you, but if you're eagerly awaiting Scarlet and Violet, I'm sorry. Given that they're set to release within a year of Arceus, I do not have any hope they will fix any of the major issues within the game. A more full trailer for the upcoming games actually came out recently, and while there are some good changes, like an unrestricted open world, actual multiplayer, and a rival that isn't a 12-year-old, the parts of the world we've seen still look really empty. It also looks like they're sizing the Pokemon more realistically, which hopefully means we can get a full-size Wailord. But there aren't any massive Pokemon in the trailer, so who knows. I would like you to understand, though, that realistically sized Pokemon is not something to be impressed by. There are correctly sized models for all the Diamond and Pearl remake Pokemon in those games. They just have them shrunk down. Also, the unrestricted open world I mentioned a second ago means the emphasis is still on exploration. So if they haven't added a lot more to the world, then it's just going to fall flat again. Honestly though, I don't think Scarlet Violet or even the game after will fully address the issues I touched on. But maybe the game after Scarlet Violet will be better. But you can of course ignore me, and if you really did enjoy Legends Arceus, even in its half-finished, quarter-finished, some level of unfinished state, then go ahead and ignore me. Enjoy what you want to enjoy. I just want to provide an informative opinion that hopefully at least sounds mildly intelligent. At the end of the day, though, my opinion of Legends Arceus comes down to this. Game Freak gave us Pokemon fans another piece of rotting meat. It might be a different type of meat, but it's definitely still rotting. Since they decided to simply create a completely different game instead of actually tweaking and refining what they had, I don't really have any hope that Pokemon will ever reach its full potential. I'll buy another one in a few years because there isn't much else that quite scratches that Pokemon itch, but I don't expect to see many differences from what we have now to what we'll have then. But don't let this cynical, low CR dirtbag pull you down too. If you enjoy it, go ahead. If you have the time and money to keep your hopes up for more new games, then go right ahead. I'm just a broke baby, so I have to think really hard about where those $60 are going. Until next time though, have an extraordinary day, everyone.